Chapter 1. The perfect opportunity. I've always been the type to overthink job changes. My previous position at Wellington Financial had been stable, if mind-numbingly boring, but the pay cut during the pandemic made staying impossible with rent in this city. So when the listing for Nexus Analytics appeared in my inbox that morning, better salary, better benefits, and only a 15-minute drive from my apartment, it felt too good to be true. The building itself wasn't impressive, a converted warehouse, with exposed brick and those industrial windows that never quite sealed against the wind. But the office space inside had been renovated to a polish that spoke of recent success. Glass-walled conference rooms, standing desks, a kitchen stocked with actual food instead of just coffee and creamer. Mark Holloway, the CEO, interviewed me personally. He had this way of leaning forward when I spoke, like every word mattered, not the fake attention most bosses give while checking their phone under the table. His eyes, unusually pale blue against his dark hair, stayed locked on mine. "Your portfolio is exceptional," he said, sliding my resume across his desk with a finger tapping my previous project with Wellington. "Especially this analytics framework. Very elegant solution." I felt my cheeks warm at the compliment. "Thank you. That was actually a bit of a workaround since they wouldn't approve the software licenses we needed." Mark's smile deepened, creating a single dimple on his left cheek. "Resourceful. I like that." He glanced at his watch. A simple design, but clearly expensive. "I have another meeting, but I'd like you to meet the team before you go. I think you'll fit in perfectly here." The team was small, just 7 people besides Mark, but they all seemed genuinely happy to be there. Ellie from HR actually hugged me before I left, like we were already friends instead of potential colleagues. Walking to my car afterward, I already knew I'd take the job if offered. The salary was 20% higher than Wellington, and something about the energy of the place felt right. My phone buzzed as I reached for my keys. An email from Mark himself, not HR, offering me the position, asking if I could start the following Monday. 5 days later, I stepped into Nexus Analytics as their new data specialist. Mark greeted me at the door with a coffee. Black, no sugar, exactly how I'd ordered it during our interview. I remember thinking how unusual it was for a CEO to remember something so small about a new hire. "Welcome to the family," he said, guiding me through the security door with a hand lightly pressed against my back. The lock clicked behind us with a soft, definitive sound. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Chapter 2. The Missing Files. The first week at Nexus flew by in a blur of new faces, passwords, and procedures. My predecessor had left abruptly, something about a family emergency requiring relocation, and the transition documentation was minimal at best. Mark was surprisingly hands-on, stopping by my desk several times daily to check on my progress. "Don't worry about getting everything perfect right away," he assured me on Wednesday when I apologized for asking so many questions. "That's why I'm here." His hand rested briefly on my shoulder, a casual gesture of reassurance that somehow left my skin tingling for minutes afterward. By Friday, I'd organized most of the active client files, but something felt off about the directory structure. There were folders marked with client codes that didn't match any of the accounts listed in our management system. When I tried to open one, a password prompt appeared. "Hey, Tina," I called across to the office manager. "Do you know what these P-series folders are? They're not matching our active accounts." She glanced up from her monitor with a blank expression. "P-series? I don't think I've seen those." Her eyes flicked toward Mark's office, then back to me. "Have you asked Mark about it?" As if summoned, Mark appeared from around the corner. "Asked me about what?" His smile was pleasant, but I noticed his eyes weren't joining in. I turned my screen toward him. "These password-protected folders. They're not matching any clients in the system." He leaned over my shoulder, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something with notes of cedar and something metallic. "Ah, legacy projects. They're under pretty strict NDAs, so we keep them segregated. Don't worry about those for now." I nodded, though something in his tone left me unsettled. "Should I have access to them eventually, or—" "We'll see." He straightened up. "How about lunch? Team's ordering from that new Thai place." The subject was changed, and I let it drop. But later that afternoon, I noticed something peculiar. Mark had left for a meeting, But before walking out, he locked his office door. Not just closed it, actually took out a key and locked it. I'd never seen anyone lock an interior office door before. When he returned an hour later, I watched as he unlocked it, glancing around the office first as if checking who was watching. Our eyes met briefly, and he gave me that same dimpled smile that had seemed so charming during my interview. Now it just seemed practiced. That night, I dreamed about locked doors. In the dream, I was trying every key on a massive ring, but none of them fit. Behind me, footsteps approached, unhurried but constant. I woke up at 3 a.m., sheets damp with sweat, with the distinct feeling I was being watched. I got up to check my apartment's locks, then stood at the window for a long time, staring. At the empty street below, a single car was parked under a streetlight, a dark sedan I didn't recognize. As I watched, its headlights flashed once, then went dark again. Probably just someone unlocking their car with a remote, I told myself, but I kept the blinds closed. For the rest of the night. Chapter 3. After hours, 2 weeks into the job, I found myself falling behind on the quarterly client reports. Not entirely my fault. The disorganized files left by my predecessor were like trying to assemble a puzzle with half the pieces missing. I decided to stay late on Thursday to catch up without the constant interruptions of the workday. Planning. A late night? Mark asked, pausing by my desk as the office began emptying around 5:30. I nodded, gesturing at my cluttered screen. Just want to get these reports in order before tomorrow's client call. Admirable dedication. He smiled that isometric smile. I'll be here late too. Budget planning. Don't hesitate to knock if you need anything. As the office emptied, a strange quiet settled over the space. The automatic lights dimmed in unused areas, creating pools of shadow between the illuminated workstations. I found myself glancing up more frequently as the evening progressed, oddly aware of Mark's presence in his office at the end of the hall. The door was closed, but light spilled from beneath it. Around 8 p.m., I heard voices. At first, I thought Mark was on a call, but the cadence suggested an in-person conversation. I hadn't seen anyone enter, but I'd been absorbed in my work for the past hour. The voices grew louder, Mark's distinctive baritone and another man's, sharper and more insistent. Though I couldn't make out specific words, the tone was unmistakably confrontational. Suddenly, something slammed, a fist on a desk, perhaps. I flinched, my hand jerking on the mouse. The voices fell silent for a moment, then resumed at a lower volume. 10 minutes later, Mark's door opened. I kept my eyes fixed on my screen, but peripherally watched a tall man in a charcoal suit exit. He wasn't anyone I recognized from the company. He moved with a deliberate precision that seemed at odds with the heated exchange I'd overheard. The man paused at the security door, swiping a key card. Strange, since visitors were supposed to be escorted out. He glanced back once, not at Mark's office, but directly at me. Though his face remained expressionless, something in his gaze sent a chill through me. Then he was gone. Mark appeared in his doorway moments later, straightening his tie. When he spotted me, he smiled as if nothing had happened. Still at it? Dedication indeed. He walked over, his usual confident stride a touch too careful. How's it coming along? Almost done, I lied, not wanting to stay any longer than necessary now. Just finishing up. As he stood beside my desk, I noticed something on his sleeve. A small dark stain that hadn't been there earlier. He saw me looking and casually adjusted his cuff to cover it. Well, don't stay too late. Work-life balance is important. He chuckled, but it sounded hollow. The security system arms at 10. Gets a bit finicky after that. After he returned to his office, I packed up quickly. On my way out, I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. Small security cameras positioned throughout the office. One was angled directly at my workstation, its tiny red light blinking steadily. Another pointed at the hallway leading to the restrooms. A third covered the kitchen area. Standard office security, probably. But as I walked to my car through the now dark parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were more cameras than necessary for a small analytics firm. Or the way the visitor had looked at me. Not with surprise at finding someone still working, but with recognition. That night, I researched Nexus Analytics more thoroughly than I had before accepting the job. Founded 5 years ago by Mark Holloway, Previously of Sentinel Data Systems. No major press coverage. No complaints filed with the Better Business Bureau. Everything looked legitimate on paper. So why couldn't I shake this growing knot of unease in my stomach? Chapter 4. The Shared Ride. The following Monday brought unusually heavy rain, the kind that turns morning commutes into nerve-wracking ordeals. I was halfway to work when my car began making an alarming rattling sound, followed by the check engine light flashing on my dashboard. I managed to limp into the Nexus parking lot, but by the time I hurried through the downpour to the building entrance, I was soaked and 15 minutes late. Car trouble? Mark asked, appearing beside me as I dripped onto the lobby floor. I pushed, wet hair from my face. Check engine light, and that lovely death rattle that costs at least 4 figures to fix. Bad timing with this weather. He frowned sympathetically. Let me know if you need a ride home. I'm happy to help. I thanked him but planned to call a mechanic during lunch. By late afternoon, however, the verdict was grim. My car would need to stay overnight for repairs. The rain had intensified, overwhelming. The storm drains and flooding side streets. When I opened the rideshare app, the wait time showed 45 minutes due to weather demand. Still stranded? Mark appeared at my desk as I was contemplating my limited options. I sighed. Apparently half. The city wants a ride in this weather? My offer stands. I'm heading out in 15 minutes. Under normal circumstances, I might have declined. But with the torrential rain and flooded streets, my options were limited. If you're sure it's not too much trouble, not at all. I live in Westlake. Where are you? Ridgewood Heights, the apartment complex on Oakmont. His eyebrows raised slightly. That's practically on my way. It's settled then. Mark's car was a black Audi, immaculately maintained. He held an umbrella over me as we dashed from the building, a gesture that should have felt chivalrous, but somehow left me feeling cornered between him and the passenger door. Once inside, I noticed how clean the interior was, almost sterile. No receipts in the cup holders, no chargers plugged into the dash, not even a speck of dust on the console. It felt more like a showroom vehicle than one someone drove daily. Buckle up, he said, smiling as he started the engine. Safety first. As we pulled onto the main road, Mark took an unexpected turn. Isn't the highway faster? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Normally, yes, but Miller Road floods badly in this weather. I know a better route. The better route took us through an industrial area I didn't recognize, warehouses and manufacturing plants looming gray through the rain-streaked windows. The wipers thumped rhythmically, creating a hypnotic backdrop to the increasingly uncomfortable silence. So, Mark said finally, you're from Chicago originally? I turned to look at him, surprised. How did you know that? He kept his eyes on the road. You mentioned it during your interview, I believe. Had I? I couldn't remember discussing my hometown. And Northwestern for undergrad, right? Impressive school. That definitely hadn't come up in my interview. My resume listed my degree, but not the institution. You must have a good memory, I said carefully. I like to know my team well. His hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Speaking of which, how's your sister doing at UCLA? Medical school must be challenging. My stomach dropped. I had never mentioned my sister to anyone at work. She's fine. I managed, trying to mask my unease. How did you had a family photo on your desk. I noticed the UCLA medical hoodie. His explanation came too quickly, too smoothly. I definitely had no such photo on my desk. When I tried to casually check if my door was locked, I noticed something else disturbing. The interior door handle had been modified, flattened and nearly flush with the door panel, and when I subtly tested it, it didn't move. Child locks, Mark said, noticing my movement. Safety feature. They engage automatically when the car starts. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Can't be too careful these days. We drove the rest of the way in silence, my mind racing through possibilities, none of them good. When we finally reached my apartment building, the relief was overwhelming. Thanks for the ride, I said, gathering my bag. Mark reached across me to unlock my door, his arm brushing mine in a way that felt deliberate. Anytime. We take care of our own at Nexus. As I hurried through the rain toward my building, I resisted the urge to look back. But I knew without checking that he was still there, watching me until I disappeared inside. Chapter 5. The background check. The email arrived at 6:42 a.m., jolting me awake faster than any alarm. The subject line read, "Notice of Identity Verification," and the sender was TransUnion Credit Monitoring. Someone had run a comprehensive background check using my Social Security number yesterday at 7:15 p.m., right around the time Mark had dropped me at my apartment. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. The email detailed the inquiry: credit history, past addresses, employment verification, criminal record search, and even medical history access had been requested. The report had been delivered to Sentinel Private Holdings, not Nexus Analytics. First thought was identity theft, but this felt targeted. Too specific. Too thorough. At the office, I approached Ellie from HR during her morning coffee run. Her perpetual smile faltered slightly when I mentioned the background check. "That's strange," she said, glancing toward Mark's still empty office. "We did the standard employment screening before you started, but nothing this extensive. And definitely not through a company called Sentinel. Could it be a routine thing? Maybe for benefits enrollment or something?" She shook her head. "We use Westfield Services for all our verification needs. And we'd need your explicit consent for anything beyond the initial screening." Her voice dropped. "I'd change your passwords, just to be safe." Throughout the morning, I kept glancing at Mark's office. He hadn't arrived yet, unusual for someone who typically beat everyone to the office. When he finally appeared around 11, he looked uncharacteristically disheveled. His normally impeccable shirt had a coffee stain on the cuff, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He didn't stop by my desk as he usually did, heading straight to his office and closing the door. Through the glass wall, I could see him on the phone, gesturing emphatically with one hand while the other rubbed at his temple. Around noon, I needed to ask him about access credentials for a client database. His door was slightly ajar, so I approached, about to knock when I caught a glimpse of his computer screen. He was scrolling through what appeared to be my financial records, account numbers visible, transactions highlighted. I froze, unsure if I should retreat or confront him. Before I could decide, he sensed my presence and swiveled his chair. "Need something?" His tone was pleasant, but his expression was tight as he casually minimized the window. "Just the Mercer account credentials," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Right." He jotted something on a sticky note and handed it to me. As I took it, his fingers brushed mine deliberately. "Everything okay? You seem tense." "Fine," I lied. "Just a lot to catch up on." His pale blue eyes studied my face, searching for something. "If you need anything at all, my door is always open." A pause. "Well, figuratively speaking, back at my desk, I changed every password I could think of. Email, banking, social media, cloud storage. I enabled two-factor authentication where available. Then I created a new document, carefully noting every strange occurrence since starting. At Nexus, the locked files, the argument I'd overheard, the cameras, Mark's knowledge of my sister, and now this background check. I saved the file to my personal cloud storage, not the company network, and titled it Insurance, because that's what it was. Insurance against whatever was happening here. Something told me I might need it soon. That evening, I left precisely at 5, making sure Mark saw me pack up and go. Instead of heading home, I went to a coffee shop 3 blocks away and opened my laptop. First, I researched Sentinel Private Holdings, the company that had requested my background check. The results were sparse. A holding company incorporated in Delaware 5 years ago. No website, minimal digital footprint. But one result caught my eye. A business registration listing Mark Holloway as the principal officer, dated 1 month before Nexus Analytics was established. My coffee grew cold as I dug deeper. Sentinel had purchased the warehouse building where Nexus now operated. They also owned 3 other properties in the city, all commercial real estate with limited public information available. When I finally left the coffee shop, the streets were dark and nearly empty. I took a rideshare home, checking twice to make sure I wasn't being followed. As the car turned onto my street, I noticed a dark sedan parked half a block from my building, similar to the one I'd seen outside my window the night after noticing Mark's locked office door. The car was gone the next morning. But when I checked my phone, I had a text from an unknown number. "How was the coffee at Westlake Brew?" Their Wi-Fi can be unreliable. Might want to try somewhere more secure next time. I stared at the message, my hands suddenly cold. Westlake. Brew was where I'd been researching Sentinel last night. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. Someone had followed me, and they wanted me to know it. Chapter 6. The Locked Drawer. A week after the background check incident, I arrived at work to find maintenance staff replacing the lock on my desk's bottom drawer. "Morning," said the older man in gray coveralls, not looking up from his work. "Sorry for the intrusion. Should be done in a few minutes." "I didn't request a lock replacement," I said, setting down my bag. He shrugged. "Work order just says drawer stuck. Common with these old desks. Humidity warps the wood, but my drawer hadn't been stuck. I'd accessed it yesterday afternoon to store my personal notebook. There we go," he said, sliding the drawer open and closed to demonstrate. "Good as new." He handed me a small silver key. "Only copy, so don't lose it." After he left, I opened the drawer cautiously. My notebook was there, seemingly untouched, but positioned differently than I'd left it. Beneath it was something I definitely hadn't put there. A small orange prescription, bottle with the label partially torn off. Only the first name Sarah remained visible. I turned the bottle carefully in my hand. Inside were 3 white pills. A quick internet search of the partial drug code visible on the label identified them as anxiety medication. Sarah. The name rang a bell. During my first week, Tina had mentioned my predecessor in passing. Sarah something, the one who'd left. Suddenly, for a family emergency, tucked against the back of the drawer was another item that wasn't mine. A phone charger with a distinctive blue-braided cable. The type of personal item someone might keep at their desk for daily use. The type of thing they wouldn't leave behind if they were planning to depart. I approached Tina during lunch when most of the team was out. "The person I replaced," I began casually. "Sarah, right? Has anyone heard from her?" Tina's cheerful expression flickered. "Sarah Winters. And no, not that I'm aware of. She left pretty suddenly, didn't she? Family emergency in Arizona, I think." Tina's eyes darted toward Mark's empty office. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious. Found some things in my desk that might be hers." Tina nodded a little too quickly. "I can mail them to her if you'd like. Do you have her contact information?" "HR would, but I'd just give anything to Mark. He handles all former employee matters personally." That evening, I searched for Sarah Winters on social media. Her LinkedIn profile showed her employment at Nexus ending 3 months ago, but her profile had been stripped of all content, just a name and a default avatar. Her Facebook and Instagram accounts had been deactivated. It was as if she'd digitally disappeared. The next morning, I decided to check the basement parking level that had been closed for maintenance since I'd started. The elevator required a keycard for B1, but the stairwell access was unlocked. I waited until Mark was in a meeting, then slipped into the stairwell and descended. The basement level was dimly lit, concrete walls amplifying the sound of my footsteps. Most of the parking spaces were empty, dust patterns suggesting long-term vacancy. At the far end, a chain-link cage contained what appeared to be storage. Old furniture, filing cabinets, abandoned office equipment. As I approached, I noticed fresh tire marks on the dusty floor, leading to a section cordoned off with yellow caution tape. Behind it sat a single vehicle covered with a tarp. The edge of the tarp had come loose, revealing a glimpse of dark blue paint, the same color as the sedan I'd seen outside my apartment. Looking for something, I whirled around to find Victor, the building security guard, watching me from the phi. "Stairwell door. Just exploring," I said, trying to sound casual. "I didn't realize we had storage down here." Victor's expression remained neutral, but his eyes were wary. "This area's off limits. Structural concerns. You should head back up." As we walked to the stairwell, I decided to take a chance. "Victor, how long have you worked security here?" 3 years. "So you knew Sarah Winters?" His stride faltered almost imperceptibly. "Sure, nice lady. Did she really leave for a family emergency?" We reached the stairwell door. Victor held it open, his face carefully blank. "You know, in 3 years, I've seen 7 people leave your position. All sudden departures, family emergencies, new opportunities, health issues." He lowered his voice. "None of them ever came back for their things. None of them ever said goodbye. My blood ran cold. 7 people in 3 years? Victor's eyes met mine, something like warning in them. Company handbook says all staff changes are confidential. I shouldn't discuss it further. As I walked back to my desk, the office suddenly felt different. The modern glass walls seemed less transparent, the security cameras more intrusive, the locks on certain doors more significant. For the first time, I truly understood. This wasn't just about Mark's unusual interest in me. Something systemic was happening at Nexus Analytics. And whatever it was, Sarah Winters and 6 others before me had discovered it too late. Chapter 7. The security footage. The IT department at Nexus consisted of one person, a lanky guy named Reed who rarely emerged from the server room except to refill his massive energy drink cup. When my computer froze during a system update, the following week, I finally had a legitimate reason to seek him out. "Sorry about this," Reed said, typing rapidly as he remotely accessed my workstation. "The update has a known issue with the analytics suite. Gotta reinstall your permissions." He glanced at me apologetically. "You'll be locked out for about 30 minutes. No rush," I assured him. I could use a coffee break anyway. As I stood to leave, his phone buzzed. He checked it and grimaced. "Crap, server alert in the East Wing. Do you mind if I—" "Go ahead. I'll wait here." The moment Reed disappeared down the hallway, I turned to his unattended workstation. The admin panel was still open, showing my user profile and permission. Settings. But what caught my eye was a folder labeled SecOps in the sidebar, Security Operations. I glanced toward the door, then clicked. Inside were dozens of subfolders organized by date. I opened the most recent, finding hundreds of video files, security camera footage, presumably. The file names followed a consistent pattern, date, time, and location. Most were labeled with areas I recognized from the office: main entrance, finance depth, hallway, XB. But others had different designations: Oakmont 301, Lakeshore Entrance, Westview Park. My apartment was Unit 301 at the Oakmont complex. Heart pounding, I clicked on Oakmont 301 from 3 days ago. The video showed the entrance to my apartment building, the same view I saw every day walking in. A timestamp in the corner showed 7:48 p.m. I watched myself return home from work, check my mailbox, then proceed to the elevator. The camera wasn't inside the building. It appeared to be mounted across the street, zoomed in on the entrance. I checked other dates. Each file showed the same view, tracking my comings and goings like a surveillance log. I quickly closed that folder and opened Westview Park. This showed a jogging path where I ran most weekends. Lakeshore Entrance captured the coffee shop I frequented. Each location was somewhere I visited regularly. My throat tightened as I realized the extent of the surveillance. These weren't random security cameras. This was targeted monitoring of my personal routines. A notification popped up on Reed's screen. Remote access terminated. My 30 minutes were up. I quickly closed the folders and returned to my workstation, mind racing. That afternoon, I requested access to historical client data for my quarterly analysis. Mark approved without hesitation, adding my user profile to several previously restricted areas of the system. What he didn't know was that this permission cascade also granted me tangential access to the operations network, including limited security camera controls. That night, I stayed late again, waiting until Mark left for what he described as a business dinner. Once alone, I accessed the security panel from my workstation. The camera interface showed multiple feeds, standard office surveillance. But I also found a separate network of cameras accessible through the same system. Some were listed under Personal Monitoring Program, or PMP. Each had a name attached. My name was there, alongside several others I didn't recognize. And one, I did. Sarah Winters. I clicked on her profile. Unlike the others, her feeds were inactive, marked terminated in red text. But the archive remained accessible. I selected a random date from 4 months ago. The video showed a woman in her early 30s with auburn hair working at what was now my desk. She looked tired, constantly glancing toward Mark's office as she typed. At one point, she pulled out a notebook, the same one I'd found in my drawer, and wrote something with urgent strokes. Another file showed her apartment building, a different complex than mine, but monitored from the same across-the-street vantage point. A third captured her at a restaurant, seemingly on a date, completely unaware of being recorded. The last active file in Sarah's archive was dated 3 days before her supposed departure. It showed her desk at night, empty except for a phone, with a distinctive blue charging cable. The timestamp read 11:42 p.m. Mark entered the frame, stood looking at her desk for a moment, then opened her drawer using a key. He removed several items, including what appeared to be the prescription bottle I'd found. Then he looked directly at the camera and nodded once before the feed cut to static. I felt physically ill. Whatever had happened to Sarah Winters, it hadn't been a family emergency. As I closed the security program, a notification appeared on my screen. Remote access detected. Someone was watching my computer activity. I quickly opened a client spreadsheet to appear busy, then glanced at the office cameras. The light on the camera above my desk was blinking more rapidly than usual. And though the office was supposedly empty, I heard the distinctive sound of a door closing somewhere in the building. I wasn't alone, and whoever was there knew exactly what I'd discovered. Arksata, Chapter 8, The Email Thread. After discovering the surveillance system, I changed my routines drastically. I switched coffee shops, took different routes home, and began paying for everything in cash. At work, I maintained a facade of normalcy while secretly documenting everything on an encrypted drive I kept with me at all times. 2 days later, Mark summoned me to his office to troubleshoot an issue with the dashboard we'd developed for our largest client. The conversion metrics aren't displaying correctly, he explained, gesturing at his monitor. Can you take a look? I sat at his desk while he stood behind me, close enough that I could feel his breath on my neck. The dashboard indeed showed corrupted data visualizations, requiring me to access the back-end code. This might take a few minutes, I said, hoping he'd give me space. No rush. I'll grab coffee. Want some? When he left, I worked quickly to fix the dashboard issue, but my peripheral vision caught something on his secondary monitor, an email thread with the subject line, Participant Compliance Assessment. I glanced toward the door. Mark was still in the kitchen area, chatting with Tina. Taking a risk, I clicked on the email thread. The conversation was between Mark and someone identified only as SD. Their discussion revolved around what they called monitoring periods and containment protocols. One particular exchange made my blood freeze. SD. How is the current subject progressing? Mark. Awareness indicators at threshold levels. Noticed surveillance yesterday but continuing normal functions. More resilient than W? Possibly suitable for extended program rather than standard processing. SD. Timeline for acquisition? Mark. Preparing final assessment phase. 2 weeks maximum. The thread contained multiple references to previous participants identified only by initials, including SW, Sarah Winters, presumably. Each entry included clinical observations about their behavior patterns, psychological responses to surveillance, and final processing outcomes. My hands trembled as I scrolled, finding a reference to myself. Current subject demonstrates heightened analytical capability and pattern recognition. Security consciousness evolved more rapidly than standard. Recommend accelerated timeline before countermeasures develop further. A notification sound from the hallway alerted me to Mark's return. I quickly closed the email and returned to the dashboard repair, heart hammering against my ribs. Any luck? Mark asked, setting a coffee beside me. Black, no sugar, just as I took it. Almost there, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. Just a data formatting issue. He leaned over my shoulder, eyes on the screen. You're quite good at this, finding patterns others miss. His hand came to rest on the back of my chair, fingers inches from my shoulder. It's what makes you so valuable. I finished the repair in tense silence, hyper-aware of his proximity and the weight of what I'd just discovered. As the dashboard refreshed with corrected metrics, Mark straightened. Perfect. He smiled, that familiar single dimple appearing. I knew you'd sort it out. I stood to leave, but he remained between me and the door. By the way, he said, I noticed you've been taking different routes home this week. The casual observation hung in the air like a threat. I forced a confused smile. Have I? I guess I've been trying to avoid that construction on Oakmont, of course. His pale eyes studied my face. Adaptability is another quality I admire in you. As I turned to leave, he added, "Oh, and the IT team mentioned some unusual access patterns from your workstation. Anything I should know about?" I kept my expression neutral with effort. "Just gathering historical data for the quarterly report. The permission settings were a bit confusing." "I see." He nodded slowly. "Well, if you need access to anything, just ask. No need to explore on your own." Back at my desk, I pulled up the company directory, searching for anyone with the initials SD. Nothing matched. Whoever Mark was corresponding with about participants and processing wasn't officially affiliated with Nexus. I checked the time. 3:17 p.m. Too many hours left in the workday to make a sudden departure seem natural. I had to maintain the pretense of normalcy until I could safely leave. Opening my work email, I crafted messages about ongoing projects, scheduled meetings for the following week, and responded to client inquiries, all the while acutely aware of the camera above my desk and Mark's occasional glances from his office. My mind raced through options. Going to the police seemed logical, but what evidence did I have? Suspicious emails I'd accessed without authorization? Security footage I'd viewed illegally? And what crime could I even report? Surveillance wasn't illegal if conducted in public spaces. As I weighed my options, a calendar invitation appeared in my inbox. Mark had scheduled a performance review for the following evening at 6:30 p.m., well after most employees would have left for the day. The meeting location wasn't our usual conference room, but the rarely used executive suite on the building's top floor. 2 words from the email thread flashed in my mind: acquisition timeline. I had less than 24 hours to figure out what was happening at Nexus Analytics and how to escape it. Chapter 9. The warning that night, I barely slept. Every noise outside my apartment sent me to the window, checking for dark sedans or watching figures. I spent hours researching Mark Holloway and Sentinel Private Holdings, finding little beyond corporate registrations and a few business journal mentions. Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and began packing a bag. Essentials only, enough for a few days away. My plan was half-formed. Finish tomorrow's workday normally, then instead of attending the performance review, drive to my cousin's lake house 2 hours north. From there, I could figure out next steps away from Nexus's surveillance network. Arrived at the office early the next morning, before anyone else. My goal was to download any evidence I could find to support what was happening, though I wasn't sure who I'd show it to or what they could do. The office felt different in the pre-dawn quiet, shadowed and vaguely threatening. I worked quickly, copying security logs and email threads I had legitimate access to, avoiding anything that would trigger system alerts. By the time others began arriving, I had compiled a modest dossier of irregularities. Nothing conclusive, but enough to establish a pattern of unusual behavior. I saved everything to my encrypted drive, then began my regular work tasks as if nothing were wrong. Mark didn't arrive until nearly noon. When he did, he looked unusually polished. Fresh haircut, new suit, radiating confidence. He stopped by my desk with his typical smile. "Looking forward to our meeting this evening," he said. "I think you'll find it quite illuminating." "Absolutely," I lied. "Should I bring anything specific? Just yourself?" His eyes lingered on mine a beat too long. "Everything else has been prepared?" The way he said it sent ice through my veins. At lunch, I made a show of ordering delivery to the office, but slipped out while waiting for it to arrive. I needed to check my car before the end of the day. Ensure it hadn't been tampered with, like I suspected Mark had done to Sarah Winters's vehicle. The parking garage was quiet at midday. I approached my car carefully, checking for anything unusual. The exterior looked normal, but when I crouched to examine the undercarriage, I spotted it immediately, a small black device magnetized to the frame, no larger than a matchbox. A tracking device, professionally installed. I was debating whether to remove it, which would alert Mark that I'd found it, when my phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. "Don't remove it. Don't react. They're watching the garage. Feed right now." I froze, then slowly stood and pretended to check my tire pressure, looking around casually. No one was visible, but the security cameras in the garage would have a clear view of me. Another text arrived. Scheduled maintenance in server room at 3:15. Building cameras loop for 4 minutes. Your only window. My heart raced as I returned to the office, trying to appear normal while my mind spun through possibilities. Who sent the texts? A sympathetic insider? Another target of whatever Mark was doing? Or was it a trap to confirm my suspicions? The afternoon dragged with excruciating slowness. I worked methodically, responding to emails, attending a team meeting, all while watching the clock tick toward 3:15. At 3:10, I gathered my purse and jacket, making a show of heading to the bathroom. Once in the hallway, I waited, counting seconds. At precisely 3:15, the overhead lights flickered briefly, the telltale sign of the backup generator kicking in during routine server maintenance. I moved quickly down the back stairwell to the parking garage, expecting at any moment to hear an alarm or footsteps in pursuit. The garage was empty, my car sitting exactly where I'd left it. I reached underneath and detached the tracker, then hurried to the visitor section at the far end. A maintenance van was parked there, its side door slightly ajar. As I approached, hesitantly, the door slid open, revealing a middle-aged woman in coveralls. 4 minutes, she said tersely. Inside now. I hesitated only a second before climbing in. The woman closed the door behind me and moved to the driver's seat. Who are you? I asked as she started the engine. Someone who made the mistake of working for Mark Holloway. Her voice was flat, emotionless. Like you. Like Sarah before you. Like Thomas before her. Sarah Winters? You know what happened to her? The woman navigated out of the garage, checking mirrors constantly. I can't tell you everything now. Cameras will be back online in 30 seconds. When they are, your empty desk will trigger protocols. What protocols? What is Mark doing? She handed me a burner phone. Ditch your current phone immediately. It's compromised. The battery is a tracking beacon even when powered off. She pulled onto the main road, accelerating smoothly. Mark isn't who you think. Nexus isn't what you think. And if you'd gone to that meeting tonight, you would have disappeared just like the others. In my hand, the burner phone displayed a single message. They found Sarah last week. Body in the wetlands outside the city. Police report says animal attack. Medical examiner says otherwise. You're next on the acquisition list. Only difference is, I'm getting you out first. Chapter 10. The Late Meeting. The woman introduced herself as Diane, former head of operations at Nexus before being retired last year. She'd been monitoring the company since her forced departure, trying to gather evidence about what was happening there. I couldn't save Sarah, she said, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. I was too cautious, too slow. By the time I realized the pattern, she was already gone. Pattern? What pattern? Mark's acquisitions. Always the same. A new hire with specific psychological traits, isolated from family, technically skilled. He monitors them, tests them, then once they notice something's wrong, she made a sharp turn onto a side street. That's when he schedules the performance review. My phone buzzed in my pocket. My real phone, not the burner. Diane shot me a warning look. Don't answer. And for God's sake, don't turn it off. That alerts them immediately. I checked the screen. Mark calling. I declined the call, but seconds later, a text appeared. Where are you? Everything okay? Team's wondering if you're coming back from lunch. The casual tone was chilling given what I now knew. I showed Diane the message. He's establishing a public record, she said grimly. Creating witnesses who'll say you left voluntarily seemed distracted. Standard procedure. I need to go to the police. With what? Workplace surveillance? Creepy boss? They won't act without evidence of an actual crime. She glanced at me. Besides, Mark has connections in the department. Why do you think Sarah's death was ruled an animal attack despite the evidence? We drove to an old motel on the outskirts of town, the kind with exterior corridors and a flickering vacancy sign. Diane led me to a room at the far end, away from the office. Inside, the walls were covered with photos, printouts, and maps connected by red string. An analog investigation board. Sarah Winters' LinkedIn profile picture was prominently displayed, alongside 7 other faces I didn't recognize. The previous data specialists, Diane explained. All reported missing or found dead under suspicious circumstances within 6 months of leaving Nexus. My stomach dropped as I recognized my own face on the board, connected by a dotted line to Sarah's. You've been watching me too? Protecting you. Or trying to. Diane handed me a bottle of water. I've been tracking Mark's operation for 14 months. It's bigger than just him. Sentinel Holdings is just one branch of something that calls itself the Renewal Initiative. She pointed to documents showing financial transfers, property records, and what appeared to be medical files. They identify candidates with specific genetic and psychological profiles. Mark's job is acquisition. Others handle processing. Processing for what? Diane hesitated. That's where my information gets fragmentary. I know it involves medical procedures, extensive tissue harvesting. But the purpose, she shook her head. Something about biological compatibility and transference. Protocols. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Mark. Meeting moved up. Team gathering now in conference room. Important client emergency. Need your input ASAP. Diane read the message over my shoulder. He's escalating. Unexpected absence means he'll accelerate the timeline. What do we do now? We need concrete evidence. Something that can't be explained away. She tapped a file on the table. There's a facility outside the city. That's where they take people after acquisition. I've never been able to get close enough to document what happens there. My burner phone chimed with an alert. Diane had set up remote monitoring of Nexus's systems before her departure. She checked the notification, her expression darkening. Mark just accessed the executive suite where your meeting was scheduled. He's preparing something. She pulled up grainy security footage on her laptop, apparently hacked from Nexus's system. The camera showed Mark entering the executive suite with a black medical bag. The angle didn't reveal what he was doing inside, but when he emerged 15 minutes later, he was wearing latex gloves. We need to move, Diane said, already gathering her papers. This location isn't secure for long. As we packed her research, my phone began buzzing continuously. Multiple calls from Nexus numbers, then from unknown numbers. Finally, a text from Mark. Concerned about your safety. Car still in garage, but you're not in building. Security footage. Shows you entering stairwell but not exiting. Please confirm your location or we're calling emergency services. Diane cursed under her breath. He's establishing the narrative. Concerned employer reports missing employee. It's how he covers his tracks. We were about to leave when my phone lost signal completely. No service, no Wi-Fi, nothing. Diane checked her devices. Same result. Signal jammers, she said, voice tight with fear. They're close. She moved to the window, carefully peering through the blinds. In the parking lot below, a black SUV had pulled in, parking directly behind our vehicle. 2 men in dark suits emerged, one speaking into a handheld radio. Back exit, Diane whispered, grabbing only her laptop and a small go bag. We slipped out. The rear door into a service corridor. The motel's layout offered multiple exit points, but as we approached the side entrance, we spotted another black vehicle pulling up. They've surrounded the building, Diane muttered. How did they find us so quickly? The realization hit me with sickening clarity. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my work ID badge. The one with the proximity chip for building access. It's not just a door key, I said, the truth dawning. It's been tracking me the whole time. Diane snatched the badge and threw it down a laundry chute. Too late. They already know we're here. She pulled me toward the emergency stairwell. Roof access. It's our only chance now. As we pushed through the door to the stairs, we heard the motel's front entrance crash open, followed by heavy footsteps and terse commands. The men weren't bothering with subtlety anymore. Whatever processing awaited Nexus employees who discovered too much. It was clear Mark Holloway would do anything to ensure I didn't escape it. Chapter 11. The Rooftop Escape. The stairwell was narrow and poorly lit, emergency bulbs casting sickly yellow light as we climbed. Below us, doors slammed and voices called out commands. Systematic, professional, like a military operation, rather than a corporate security team. Who are these people? I gasped as we reached the roof access door. This isn't normal corporate security. Sentinel's enforcement arm, Diane said, trying the handle. It was locked. Mark finds the targets. These guys collect them. She pulled a small multi-tool from her pocket and began working on the lock while I pressed my ear against the door we'd just come through. Heavy footsteps echoed in the stairwell below, methodically checking each floor. "They're coming up," I whispered. Diane's hands moved faster, manipulating the lock with practiced precision. After what felt like an eternity, something clicked. She pushed the door open, and we stumbled onto the flat roof of the motel. The evening air was cool against my skin, the sun setting behind distant office buildings. The roof was mostly empty, except for HVAC equipment and a satellite dish. More importantly, there was no obvious way down except the way we'd come. "Now what?" I asked, struggling to keep panic from my voice. Diane moved to the edge of the roof, peering over. "Service ladder on the north side. Leads to the alley behind the motel." She gestured for me to follow. "It's our only option." The ladder was old, rusted in places, attached to the exterior wall with questionable bolts. 4 stories of precarious metal rungs between us and the ground. "I can't," I said, vertigo washing over me as I looked down. "I've never been good with heights, and I've never been good with being dissected alive," Diane countered grimly, "which is what awaits us if they catch us. Your choice." Behind us, the roof access door shuddered as someone tried the handle, then began pounding. The lock wouldn't hold for long. I took a deep breath and swung my legs over the edge, finding the first rung with my foot. The metal creaked ominously under my weight. "Go," Diane urged, glancing back at the door. "I'll follow." I descended as quickly as I dared, the rusty ladder swaying slightly with each movement. Halfway down, I heard the roof door crash open above. "Me." Shouting followed, then Diane's voice raised in defiance. I looked up to see her struggling with a man in a dark suit at the top of the ladder. Another suited figure appeared at the roof's edge, pointing down at me. I froze, clinging to the ladder 20 feet above the ground. The man reaching for Diane suddenly jerked backward. She had something in her hand, her multi-tool, blade extended. He clutched his arm where she'd slashed him, but the second man was already moving toward her. "Run!" she shouted down to me. "Find Detective Rivera! He has the files!" I hesitated, torn between continuing down and somehow helping her. The decision was made for me when the injured man regained his balance and kicked at the top of the ladder. The entire structure shuddered violently. I scrambled downward as the ladder's upper connection bolts tore free from the wall. The structure pivoted outward, still attached at the bottom but now angling away from the building at a terrifying slant. I clung desperately to the rungs as the ladder swung away from the wall. Above me, Diane was still fighting, but losing ground against the 2 men. The second man pulled something from his jacket, a syringe, glinting in the fading light. The ladder continued its arc away from the building, metal groaning under tension. When it reached its furthest point, I let go, dropping the last 8 feet to the alley below. Pain shot through my ankle as I landed awkwardly on the asphalt, but adrenaline kept me upright. From above, I heard Diane cry out once, then silence. I didn't look up, couldn't bear to see what was happening. Instead, I ran. The alley opened onto a street lined with small businesses, most closed for the evening. My injured ankle throbbed with each step, but fear propelled me forward. Behind me, I heard a vehicle engine roar to life. The SUV, presumably, circling around to the alley. I ducked into a convenience store, breathing hard. The teenage clerk barely glanced up from his phone as I limped to the back, searching for another exit. There was none. The store's front window offered a clear view of the street. The black SUV rolled past slowly, the driver scanning sidewalks and storefronts. In the passenger seat sat Mark Holloway, his pale eyes methodically searching for me. I pressed myself against the wall, out of sight, mind racing through options. I had no car, no phone, no money except a few bills in my pocket. I didn't know who Detective Rivera was or how to find him, and now I'd lost Diane, the only person who understood what was happening. When the SUV turned the corner, I slipped out of the store and headed in the opposite direction, keeping to side streets and shadows. My only coherent thought was to put distance between myself and Mark's people. Finding Rivera would have to wait. First, I needed to survive the night. Archiu. Chapter 12. The bus station night had fully descended by the time I reached the downtown bus terminal. My ankle throbbed with each step, and the thin jacket I'd grabbed that morning provided little protection against the evening chill. But physical discomfort was the least of my concerns. I'd walked for over an hour, zigzagging through residential neighborhoods to avoid main roads where the SUV might spot me. Twice I'd seen similar black vehicles cruising slowly past, and each time I'd ducked into shadows until they passed. The bus station offered what I needed most: anonymity among travelers and a way out of the city. The terminal was half full, mostly commuters heading home to suburbs and a few long-distance travelers with larger bags. I blended in easily, just another tired professional ending a long day. At the ticket counter, I purchased a one-way fare to Lakeside using most of the cash in my wallet, a small town 3 hours north where my cousin owned a vacation property. The clerk barely looked at me as she processed the transaction, for which I was grateful. No ID required for in-state bus travel, another small mercy. My bus wouldn't depart for 40 minutes. I found a plastic seat in the waiting area with a clear view of both the main entrance and the boarding platforms. Only then did I allow myself to process what had happened. Diane was gone, captured or worse. She'd mentioned files and a Detective Rivera, but I had no way to contact him. My phone was abandoned at the motel, and I didn't dare use the burner Diane had given me until I was safely away from the city. For all I knew, they could be monitoring cellular activity across the network. The reality of my situation settled over me like a physical weight. In less than a day, I'd gone from employee to fugitive. My car, apartment, belongings, all were now inaccessible. Returning to any of them would be walking into a trap. And for what? I still didn't fully understand what Mark was doing or why he targeted specific employees. Diane had mentioned processing and tissue harvesting, terms that conjured horrific possibilities. Whatever it was, Sarah Winters and others had died because of it. I'd nearly become another victim. A voice over the intercom announced boarding for the northbound bus. I rose carefully, favoring my injured ankle, and joined the small line of passengers. Freedom felt tantalizingly close. As I handed my ticket to the driver, movement at the terminal entrance caught my eye. 2 men in dark suits entered, scanning the waiting area systematically. They weren't the same men from the motel, but their methodical movements and earpieces marked them as part of the same operation. I ducked my head and quickly boarded, taking a seat on the far side of the bus away from the terminal windows. Through the tinted glass, I watched the men questioning the ticket clerk, who pointed toward the boarding platforms. My heart hammered as they approached the bus. The driver was still outside, checking the last few tickets. I slid lower in my seat, using the passenger in front of me as a shield. The men spoke briefly with the driver, who shook his head and gestured toward his manifest. One of the men showed him something, a photo, presumably of me. The driver squinted at it, then looked back over his shoulder at the boarded passengers. I held my breath. After an agonizing moment, he shook his head again and shrugged. The men seemed dissatisfied, but moved on to the next boarding platform where another bus was preparing to depart. The driver climbed aboard, the doors hissed closed, and the engine rumbled to life. As we pulled away from the terminal, relief washed over me in a dizzying wave. I'd escaped, for now. The bus merged onto the highway, city lights giving way to darker stretches of road. Other passengers settled in for the journey, some dozing, others absorbed in phones or books. Normalcy that felt alien to me now. 20 minutes into the trip, I finally felt safe enough to power on the burner phone Diane had given me. There was a single message waiting. If you're reading this, I'm compromised. Files on Rivera in secure folder. Password, Sarah W. 2021. I navigated to the phone's documents, finding a protected folder. When I entered the password, it opened to reveal several files: police reports, autopsy photos, and a document titled Rivera, Contact. The file contained information on Detective Michael Rivera, Major Crimes Division, assigned to the Sarah Winters case. It included his direct line and an address listed as secure meeting location, a coffee shop on the outskirts of Lakeside, the very town I was heading to. This couldn't be coincidence. Diane had directed me to Lakeside specifically because of Rivera. As I read further, the bus light suddenly flickered and died. The engine sputtered, and the vehicle began to slow. Passengers murmured in confusion as the driver announced an apparent mechanical issue. We rolled to a stop on the dark highway shoulder. "Ladies and gentlemen," the driver called out, "I'm very sorry for the inconvenience. I've called dispatch, and they're sending a replacement bus. Should be here in about 45 minutes. Passengers groaned. Under different circumstances, I might have done the same. But as I peered out the window at the empty highway, a chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the failing heat. Bus breakdowns happen, I told myself. Mechanical failures are common, but the timing was too perfect. The location too isolated. Through the front windshield, I could see the driver speaking into his radio with an intensity that seemed excessive for a routine mechanical issue. His eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. For a fraction of a second, a glance that contained recognition where there should have been none. I wasn't the only one who'd noticed. An older woman across the aisle leaned toward me and whispered, "That's not our regular driver. Jerry's been on this route for years. And I've never seen this man before." As if confirming my fears, headlights appeared on the horizon, approaching rapidly from the direction we'd come. Not a replacement bus, but a convoy of 3 vehicles. A black SUV flanked by 2 sedans of the same color. False relief had given way to a trap more effective than any direct pursuit. Chapter 13. The Farmhouse. As the convoy of black vehicles approached the disabled bus, I made a split-second decision. While other passengers were distracted, peering out windows or complaining about the delay, I slipped to the rear emergency exit. The handle gave way with a soft hydraulic hiss, thankfully not loud enough to draw attention over the general commotion. I dropped onto the grassy embankment and immediately rolled down into the drainage ditch beside the highway, ignoring the sharp pain in my ankle. Above me, I heard car doors slam and authoritative voices addressing the bus driver. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. These weren't roadside assistants. I pressed myself deeper into the shadows as flashlight beams swept across the area. The ditch ran parallel to the highway, gradually deepening into a proper culvert. I crawled along it, staying below the sightline of the road, the mud soaking through my clothes. When I'd put about 100 yards between myself and the bus, I risked climbing up the embankment to get my bearings. In the distance, I could see men in dark clothing methodically removing passengers from the bus, checking IDs. This wasn't just about finding me anymore. They were detaining and questioning everyone. The scale of resources being deployed suggested an operation far beyond what a private company should be capable of. Beyond the highway stretched farmland, open fields punctuated by the occasional cluster of buildings. About half a mile away, I spotted the lights of what appeared to be a farmhouse. With no better options, I began making my way across the field, staying low and using the rows of early summer corn for cover where possible. The going was slow with my injured ankle, and the night had grown cold enough to see my breath. By the time I reached the gravel drive leading to the farmhouse, I was shivering uncontrollably. My business attire caked with mud and thoroughly inadequate for the conditions. The house was an old 2-story structure with a broad porch and peeling white paint. A single light burned in a downstairs window, and an ancient pickup truck sat in the drive. I hesitated at the edge of the property, weighing my options. Approaching strangers was risky, but I was quickly running out of alternatives and physical endurance. Before I could decide, the porch light flicked on and the front door opened. An elderly man stepped out, shotgun held casually in the crook of his arm. "I may be old," he called out in a gravelly voice, "but my eyes and ears work fine. Come on out where I can see you." I stepped into the light, hands raised slightly. "I'm sorry to trespass. I need help." The man squinted at me, taking in my bedraggled appearance. "You look like you crawled through half the county. What kind of trouble you in, girl?" "It's complicated," I said, shivering. "There are people looking for me. Bad people." He studied me for a long moment, then gestured with the shotgun. "Well, come on in before you freeze. Martha will have a fit. If I leave someone looking like a half-drowned cat on our porch." The farmhouse interior was warm and smelled of baking. An elderly woman, Martha presumably, looked up from her knitting as we entered, her eyes widening at my appearance. "Land. Sakes, Frank, who's this? Says she's in trouble. Thought we might help her out." The old man, Frank, propped his shotgun by the door. "Get her a towel and some of Jenny's old clothes, would you?" 20 minutes later, I sat at their kitchen table wearing borrowed sweatpants and a flannel shirt, a mug of hot tea warming my hands. I'd given them an abbreviated version of my situation. A dangerous ex-boyfriend with connections in local law enforcement, looking to do me harm. Not the full truth, but close enough. "We don't have a phone out here," Frank said. "Cell tower's been down 3 weeks, and the landline company says we're too far out to be worth fixing. Is there a neighbor I could call from?" I asked. Frank shook his head. "Nearest neighbor with working phone is the Wilsons, 5 miles down the road. And they'd talk. Everybody knows everybody's business around here." Martha set a plate of cornbread in front of me. "You can stay the night in Jenny's old room. In the morning, Frank can drive you to the bus station in Millerton. It's in the opposite direction from where you came. They won't be looking there." Thanked them, overwhelmed by their kindness to a stranger. After eating, Martha showed me to a small bedroom that clearly hadn't been used in years. Faded posters of 90s bands decorated the walls, and a collection of trophies gathered dust on a shelf. "Our daughter's room," Martha explained. "She's in Seattle now, computer work." After she left, I sat on the edge of the bed and examined the burner phone again. The battery was down to 15%, enough to review Diane's files on Detective Rivera, but not much else. I memorized his contact information and the address of the meeting location in Lakeside, then powered off the phone to conserve what battery remained. Despite my exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. Every sound, the house settling, wind against the windows, distant farm equipment, jerked me back to alertness. During one such wakeful period around 3 a.m., I heard the rumble of vehicles on the distant highway. I crept to the window and peered out through threadbare curtains. In the moonlight, I could make out a procession of headlights moving slowly along the highway. At least 5 vehicles traveling in formation, sweeping the area. They hadn't given up. If anything, they'd expanded the search. As I watched, one vehicle turned off the highway onto a dirt access road that led in the general direction of the farm. Searchlights mounted on its roof swept across the fields methodically. I grabbed my few belongings and hurried downstairs. Frank was already awake, standing at the kitchen window with his shotgun. "They're checking all the properties along this stretch," he said without turning. "Saw them at the Peterson place an hour ago." "I should go," I said. "I don't want to bring trouble to you and Martha." Frank shook his head. "Too late for that. But I've got a better hiding place than this old house." He turned, his weathered face determined. "When you've farmed the same land for 40 years, you learn a few things about keeping what's yours safe." He led me through the kitchen to a pantry, then moved aside a shelf of preserves to reveal a narrow door I wouldn't have noticed otherwise. "Root cellar," he explained, swinging it open. "Goes back to Prohibition days. My grandfather built it to hide his still from revenuers." Beyond the door, steep stairs descended into darkness. Frank handed me a flashlight. "There's a tunnel that comes out in the old barn foundation about 1/4 mile east. Martha will bring you some provisions at first light. You stay put until we know it's safe." I hesitated at the top of the stairs. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Frank's expression softened slightly. "My Jenny had trouble once. Man who wouldn't take no for an answer. Someone helped her when we couldn't." He nodded toward the dark passage. "Go on now, and turn that light off once you're down there." The door closed behind me, leaving only the narrow beam of the flashlight to guide my descent into the earth beneath the farmhouse. Taturi, Chapter 14. The True Purpose. The root cellar was larger than I'd expected, with rough stone walls and a packed earth floor. Wooden shelves lined with dusty jars and ancient farm equipment occupied one side, while the other opened into a low tunnel supported by timber beams. The air was cool and damp, heavy with the scent of soil and forgotten things. I settled on an old wooden crate, conserving the flashlight's battery by using it only sparingly. In the near-perfect darkness, time became abstract. I might have dozed because I startled when a scraping sound came from above, the pantry door opening. "Hello?" I called softly, aiming the flashlight toward the stairs. Martha's face appeared, illuminated from below like a Halloween story. "They're here," she whispered. 4 men in suits showing badges. "Frank's talking to them." She descended awkwardly, carrying a canvas bag. "Brought you some food and water. And this." She handed me a small radio. "It's battery-powered. Might Help pass the time, and you can hear news if they report anything about you. Thank you, I said, taking the bag. How long do you think I'll need to stay down here? Martha's expression was grim. Those men aren't leaving anytime soon. They're searching all the outbuildings. Frank's stalling, but eventually they'll want to check the house too. Then I should go through the tunnel, I said. Where does it come out exactly? Old barn foundation east of here. It's overgrown, hard to spot unless you know what you're looking for. She hesitated. But there's nothing out that way for miles except fields. You'd be in the open. A muffled voice called from above. Frank, sounding strained. Martha tensed. I need to go back up. Stay quiet. She squeezed my hand once, then climbed the stairs with surprising agility for her age. I waited in darkness, straining to hear what was happening above. Faint voices, footsteps moving across floorboards, cabinet doors opening and closing. They were searching the house. I gathered my few belongings and moved toward the tunnel entrance. If they found the root cellar, at least I'd have a head start. Through the passage, the tunnel was narrow and lower than the cellar, forcing me to crouch as I moved forward. Dirt occasionally sifted down from between the support beams, and twice I disturbed nests of insects that scattered from the flashlight beam. I tried not to think about what else might be sharing the space with me. After what felt like several hundred yards, the tunnel began to slope upward. Eventually, I reached a wooden ladder leading to a trapdoor. I paused, listening for any sound above before cautiously pushing it open. I emerged into the ruins of what had once been a barn. Only the stone foundation remained intact, with a few rotting timbers marking where walls had once stood. Tall grass and young trees had reclaimed most of the structure, providing decent cover from casual observation. In the gray dawn light, I could see the farmhouse in the distance. Several black vehicles were parked in the drive, and figures moved around the property methodically. They were conducting a thorough search, more resources than made sense for a corporate security team, even for a company as apparently sinister as Nexus. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. While I had battery power, I turned on the burner phone one last time and opened the folder Diane had compiled on Detective Rivera. Beyond his contact information, she'd included case notes about Sarah Winters, apparently copied from police files Rivera had shared with her. The autopsy report confirmed what Diane had told me. Despite the official ruling of animal attack, the medical examiner had noted anomalies. Surgical precision in certain wounds, evidence of anesthesia in tissue samples, specific organs removed with expert technique. The ME had been overruled by someone higher up in the department. But most disturbing was a section of Rivera's personal notes, which Diane had somehow obtained. Third victim with same pattern. All former Nexus employees. All with rare genetic marker R157X. Connection to renewal initiative? Need to check medical files of other missing persons. SD appears in all. Records. Samuel Dietrich? Department pressure to drop case coming from Commissioner's office. I was still processing this information when a sharp crack echoed from the direction of the farmhouse. Even at this distance, I recognized the sound of a shotgun blast. Seconds. Later, a second shot, then silence. My blood ran cold as I watched the scene unfold through gaps in the foliage. Men in suits converged on the house with practiced efficiency. No urgency, no chaos, just the calm coordination of people who had done this before. I wanted to run toward the house, to somehow help Frank and Martha, but logic prevailed over emotion. There was nothing I could do against armed operatives except get myself captured. Or worse. With a sick feeling in my stomach, I turned away and began moving east, away from the farmhouse and across open fields. The rising sun provided light, but also eliminated shadows that might have concealed my movement. I stayed low, using irrigation ditches and crop rows for cover where possible. After an hour of careful progress, I reached a rural county road. No vehicles in sight, but I couldn't walk exposed on pavement. Too easily spotted. I paralleled the road instead, keeping to the tree line 50 yards away. By midday, exhaustion and hunger were taking their toll. The food Martha had provided was gone, and my injured ankle had swollen inside the borrowed sock and shoe. I needed rest and a new plan. Ahead, a bridge crossed a small river, the banks below overgrown with dense vegetation. It would provide cover and access to water. I made my way down the embankment and found a spot beneath the bridge where concrete supports created a small, sheltered area. As I sat trying to decide my next move, the burner phone buzzed one final time before its battery died completely. A text message had somehow come through despite the spotty rural coverage. SD, Samuel Dietrich, Chief Surgeon, Renewal Clinic. They're not killing people. Worse, they're harvesting compatible tissue for wealthy clients. Genetic matching program. You're compatible with someone important. Get to Rivera. Only chance. The phone went dark in my hand as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Mark wasn't a killer in the conventional sense. He was a procurer, finding genetically compatible people to be harvested for something called the Renewal Initiative. And I was next on the list. Chapter 15. The clinic. I spent the remainder of the day beneath the bridge, dozing fitfully and rationing the water from a plastic bottle Martha had packed. By late afternoon, I'd made a decision. I needed transportation. Walking to Lakeside would take days, and Mark's people were clearly willing to kill innocent bystanders to find me. When dusk fell, I climbed back to the road and began walking, no longer bothering to hide in the tree line. Speed was now more important than stealth. The rural highway remained mostly deserted, with only occasional vehicles passing. After about an hour, lights appeared ahead, a small gas station and convenience store at a crossroads. It was the kind of place that served local farmers and the occasional traveler, likely with minimal security cameras. Perfect for my needs. I waited in the shadows, watching the pattern of customers. The evening rush, such as it was, had ended. Only the clerk remained inside, occasionally glancing at a small television mounted behind the counter. When a middle-aged woman in a pickup truck pulled in and went inside, I made my move. Staying low, I approached the passenger side of her vehicle. The keys were still in the ignition. Rural trusting habits working in my favor for once. I slipped into the truck and slouched down in the seat, heart pounding. Through the store windows, I could see the woman paying for her purchases. The moment she turned toward the door, I sat up and started the engine. Her shouts faded behind me as I accelerated onto the highway, heading north according to the faded road signs. The truck had half a tank of gas, enough to get me to Lakeside if I was lucky. I drove cautiously, maintaining the speed limit and keeping the lights on. The last thing I needed was to be pulled over. The truck's radio provided my first connection to the outside world in nearly 24 hours. I scanned for local news, finding a station covering what they described as a tragic home invasion at a local farm. The reporter mentioned 2 elderly victims but provided no names. I switched it off, unable to bear the confirmation of what I already knew. About 20 miles north of where I'd stolen the truck, the rural landscape gave way to more developed areas, fast food restaurants, motels, and eventually a small industrial park on the outskirts of what the welcome sign identified as Riverdale. As I passed the industrial park, a set of buildings caught my eye. Modern glass and steel structures surrounded by high fencing with a discreet sign reading Renewal Medical Research. The name sent a chill through me. Without conscious decision, I pulled into a restaurant parking lot across the highway and cut the engine. This had to be the facility Diane had mentioned, where they took people after acquisition, where Sarah Winters and others had been processed. I sat watching the complex, trying to decide what to do. Continuing to Lakeside to find Detective Rivera was the logical choice, but something held me there, staring at the innocuous-looking buildings that concealed horrors. My decision was made. For me, when a familiar black SUV turned into the facility's gate. Even from this distance, I recognized Mark's silhouette in the passenger seat. He was here, which meant evidence was here. I waited until full darkness, then abandoned the truck behind the restaurant and made my way across the highway on foot. The facility's perimeter was secured with 8-foot fencing topped with barbed wire. Serious security for a medical research center. But the industrial park backed up to a wooded area, and my time crawling through drainage ditches and farm fields had taught me to look for natural weaknesses in barriers. I circled through the woods until I found what I was seeking, a drainage culvert passing beneath the fence. It was narrow and partially filled with stagnant water, but wide enough to squeeze through if I didn't mind getting wet again. The culvert emerged in a landscaped area behind what appeared to be the main building. Security lights illuminated most of the grounds, but the drainage area lay in shadow. I crouched there, observing the facility. 3 main buildings formed a campus around a central courtyard. The largest had administration etched on glass doors. To the left stood a structure marked research, and to the right, a smaller building with reflective windows and no identifying signage. All had key card access points and security cameras at entryways. As I watched, a service door opened in Saturoa, the unmarked building. A man in scrubs emerged, lighting a cigarette as he stepped into a designated smoking area near my hiding place. The door closed behind him but didn't appear to lock automatically. I waited until he was deeply engaged with his phone, then moved quickly from shadow to shadow until I reached the building's corner. When he turned to flick ash from his cigarette, I darted behind him and caught the door before it closed completely. The interior was hospital-like. Sterile corridors with linoleum floors and fluorescent lighting. I froze, expecting alarms, but nothing happened. Apparently, security focused on keeping people out, not monitoring those already inside. I moved quickly down the hallway, looking for anything that might help me understand what happened here. Most doors were locked or led to empty offices. At the corridor's end, however, double doors marked authorized personnel only stood slightly ajar. Beyond them lay what could only be described as a surgical suite. Multiple operating rooms visible through interior windows, equipped with state-of-the-art medical technology. Unlike a normal hospital, each room had unusual restraint systems attached to the tables and specialized preservation equipment lining the walls. One operating room appeared recently used, surgical tools still arranged on trays. The central table bore faint stains despite obvious cleaning, and a light box displayed imaging scans of what appeared to be a liver and kidneys. A sound from behind made me turn. A man in a white lab coat stood in the doorway, staring at me with an expression of mild surprise rather than alarm. "You're early," he said, consulting a tablet. "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow's procedure." He was older, perhaps 60, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Something in his calm demeanor sent ice through my veins. "Dr. Dietrich?" I guessed, remembering the name from Diane's files. He smiled slightly. "You've done your homework. That's refreshing. Most acquisitions arrive with no understanding of the process or their role in it." He gestured toward a door at the far end of the surgical suite. "Shall we complete your intake?" The client is quite eager to proceed. I struggled to maintain composure, playing along to gather information. The client. "May I ask who that is?" Dr. Dietrich raised an eyebrow. "That's unusual. Mark doesn't typically—" He stopped, studying me more carefully. "You're not prepped. Where is your escort?" Before I could fabricate an answer, recognition dawned in his eyes. "You're the escapee," he said softly. "The one who got away from the bus." He pressed a button on his tablet. "Security to Surgical Wing B. Unauthorized access." I turned to run, but the doors behind me burst open. 2 guards in tactical gear entered, followed by a familiar figure, Mark Holloway, looking surprisingly disheveled compared to his usual polished appearance. "There you are," he said, his voice carrying a note of genuine relief. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused? How many resources we've had to divert?" He shook his head like a disappointed parent. 2 fatalities at the farm, all completely unnecessary. "What is this place?" I demanded, backing away until I hit an equipment tray. "What happens to the people you bring here?" Mark sighed, nodding to the guards to secure the exits. "We call it biological matching. Certain individuals possess genetic markers that make them compatible donors for our clients." "Donors?" I repeated. "You mean victims? I prefer to think of it as service," Dr. Dietrich interjected. "The wealthy and powerful have always used the bodies of others to survive. We've simply perfected the process." Mark stepped closer, his voice taking on an almost soothing quality. "Your genetic profile is extraordinarily rare, a perfect match for a client who's waited years for compatible tissue. Do you understand how valuable you are? Is that supposed to make me feel better about being harvested?" I edged sideways, looking for any escape route. "The process is actually quite humane," Dr. Dietrich said, as if discussing a routine procedure. "Subjects are fully sedated. We harvest only what's necessary, Partial liver, 1 kidney, select tissue samples. Most survive the initial harvesting. The clinical detachment in his voice made my skin crawl. Initial? Mark nodded. We keep donors? In medically induced comas afterward, the body continues to regenerate tissue, allowing for multiple harvests over time. It's remarkably sustainable. I thought of Sarah Winters and the others who had disappeared, imagining them somewhere in this facility, unconscious, being periodically harvested like crops. The horror of it made my legs weak. You're monsters, I whispered. We're pragmatists, Mark corrected. Death is simply inefficient. Why let a compatible donor die after one use when they can sustain a client for years? As they spoke, I subtly reached behind me, fingers closing around a surgical scalpel from the nearby tray. I kept it concealed against my wrist as Mark approached. It's time to begin prep, Dr. Dietrich announced. The client arrives tomorrow morning. We'll need baseline samples tonight. Mark produced a syringe from his pocket. This will make things easier. No pain, I promise. As he reached for my arm, I slashed forward with the scalpel. The blade caught him across the forearm, drawing a line of bright red. He jerked back with a cry of surprise rather than pain. I lunged for the door, but one of the guards intercepted, me wrapping powerful arms around my waist. The scalpel clattered to the floor as I struggled. Sedate her, Dr. Dietrich ordered calmly, already examining Mark's wound. And secure her properly this time. The guard pinned my arms while the second produced his own syringe. I felt the needle pierce my neck, and almost immediately the room began to blur around the edges. My last conscious thought was the realization that I would wake up, if I woke at all, as nothing more than a living organ farm for someone wealthy, enough to purchase pieces of me. Chapter 16. The Last Chance. I drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of voices and movement around me but unable to fully wake. Images floated through my mind. Frank with his shotgun, Diane fighting on the motel roof, Sarah Winters writing frantically in her notebook. Faces of people I'd failed. Gradually, the fog began to lift. I became aware of a rhythmic beeping nearby, and the sensation of cool air on my skin. My limbs felt impossibly heavy, but with tremendous effort, I managed to open my eyes. I lay on a hospital bed in a small, windowless room. An IV dripped clear fluid into my arm, and monitoring equipment tracked my vital signs. My wrists and ankles were secured with padded restraints. A surgical gown had replaced my borrowed clothes. The sedative hadn't fully metabolized. They'd likely underestimated the dose needed for my body weight. I could move slightly and think somewhat clearly, but remained weak. Experimental twitches confirmed the restraints were secure, allowing only minimal movement. The room contained little besides the bed and medical equipment. A single door with a small window, a security camera in the corner, its red light blinking steadily. A rolling tray of surgical instruments stood against the wall, just out of reach. How long had I been unconscious? Hours, at least, judging by the hunger gnawing at my stomach. The clock on the wall read 4:17, but whether morning or afternoon was impossible to determine in the windowless room. I tested the restraints again, seeking any weakness. The ankle cuffs were slightly looser than those at my wrists. Perhaps my injured ankle had swollen after they were applied. I worked my right foot slowly, ignoring the pain as I tried to slip free. The door opened, and Dr. Dietrich entered carrying a tablet. He noticed my open eyes and smiled professionally. "Ah, you're with us. Good. We need baseline cognitive function before the procedure." He approached the bed, checking the monitors. "How are you feeling? Any nausea? Headache?" I remained silent, watching him. He seemed unbothered by my lack of response. "The client arrives in approximately 2 hours," he continued, making notes on his tablet. "We'll begin with a partial liver harvest, followed by stem cell collection. The kidney removal will happen during the second procedure, once we've confirmed successful transplantation of the liver segment." He spoke as if discussing a routine appointment, not the systematic dismantling of a human being. "Who is it?" I asked, my voice hoarse from disuse. Dr. Dietrich glanced up. "Pardon? The client. Who's getting pieces of me?" He seemed to consider whether to answer, then shrugged slightly. "I suppose there's no harm in telling you. Nathan Faulkner. Perhaps you've heard of him?" The name was vaguely familiar, a tech billionaire who had disappeared from public view several years ago, rumored to be suffering from a degenerative condition. He's been sustained through our program for nearly 5 years, Dietrich continued. Previous donors were adequate, but your compatibility markers are exceptional. You could potentially extend his life by decades, while I spend those decades unconscious, being harvested like crops. A poetic way to put it, but essentially correct. He checked something on my IV. We keep donors in excellent physical condition. Regular physical therapy prevents muscle atrophy. Nutritional support maintains optimal organ function. Many donors remain viable for 7 to 10 years. The casual dehumanization in his voice made my skin crawl. To him, I wasn't a person, just a collection of useful parts. Mark will be disappointed to miss the procedure, Dietrich added. He had to return to the office to manage the disruption caused by your disappearance. Quite the mess to clean up. As he leaned over to check my restraints, I noticed his keycard clipped to his lab coat pocket, tantalizingly close, but impossible to reach with my wrists secured. I'll send in the prep team shortly, he said, moving toward the door. Try to relax. Fighting only makes recovery more difficult. After he left, I renewed my efforts to free my right foot. The ankle was swollen enough that with persistent effort, I might slip free. Each movement sent pain shooting up my leg, but fear provided powerful motivation. After 15 minutes of steady effort, my foot slipped free of the restraint. One small victory. But what next? I still couldn't reach anything useful with my hands bound. The answer came from an unexpected source. The facility's lights suddenly flickered, then went out completely. Emergency lighting activated seconds later, casting the room in dim red illumination. The monitoring equipment beside me went silent. Power failure. Potentially my only chance. I stretched my free leg toward the instrument tray, using my toes to drag it closer to the bed. The effort was agonizing, but desperation fueled each movement. When the tray was finally within reach, I maneuvered a scalpel onto the bed and awkwardly used my foot to slide it up toward my hand. The blade was cold against my fingers as I gripped it and began sawing at the wrist restraint. The material was tough, designed to prevent exactly what I was attempting. But the scalpel was surgical-grade sharp. As I worked, the backup generator's distinctive hum faltered, then died altogether. The building fell into complete darkness. Chapter 17. The escape in total darkness. I worked blindly at the restraint, the scalpel slipping once and nicking my wrist. I felt warm blood, but kept sawing until the material finally gave way. With my right hand free, releasing the remaining. Restraints took only seconds. I eased off the bed, disoriented in the pitch blackness. My legs buckled. Residual effects of the sedative or simple weakness from hours of immobility. I caught myself on the bed rail, waiting for strength to return to my limbs. Voices and footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Staff responding to the power failure. I needed to move quickly before emergency systems were restored. Using the wall for guidance, I made my way to the door. It had an electronic lock that should have defaulted to secure during a power outage, but the facility's backup systems had failed completely. When I tried the handle, it opened. The corridor beyond was equally dark, illuminated only by the occasional glow of emergency exit signs. I could make out shapes of people moving at the far end, flashlight beams bouncing off walls as security. Personnel attempted to restore order. I moved in the opposite direction, keeping close to the wall. My hospital gown provided minimal coverage and 0 pockets. I had no weapon, no phone, nothing except my own determination. At the corridor's end, I found a stairwell and began climbing, reasoning that roof access might offer an escape route. 2 flights up, I emerged onto what appeared to be an administrative level. Unlike the clinical area below, this floor had windows, and through them, I could see the first hint of dawn. I'd been unconscious all night. The procedure would begin soon. Moving from shadow to shadow, I navigated the administrative floor. Most offices were locked, but one door stood ajar. A break room of some kind. Inside, I found what I desperately needed. A set of scrubs draped over a chair and a lab coat hanging on a hook. I changed quickly, discarding the hospital gown. In the lab coat's pocket, I discovered a key card and a set of car keys. The identification badge showed a woman with dark hair similar to mine. close enough in the dim emergency lighting to perhaps pass a casual inspection. Dressed as staff, I moved with more confidence. When I encountered a security guard in the hallway, I nodded professionally and kept walking, heart hammering against my ribs. He barely glanced at me, focused on his radio that crackled with reports of the power failure. According to conversations I overheard, a transformer explosion had taken out both primary and backup power systems. Engineers estimated at least an hour before partial restoration, a stroke of luck I desperately needed. I located a bank of elevators, inoperable without power, but beside them was a directory showing building layouts. The facility was more extensive than I'd realized. 3 interconnected buildings with multiple security levels. I was in the research wing, with administration and long-term care in separate structures. Long-term care. That had to be where they kept the donors after harvesting. People like Sarah Winters, kept in medically induced comas. While their bodies were systematically exploited, part of me wanted to find that area to see if Sarah and others might somehow be saved. But realistically, I couldn't help anyone if I were captured again. The directory indicated a parking garage on the lower level. Using the emergency stairs, I descended past the floor where I'd been held, continuing down to a door marked P1, staff parking. The garage was illuminated only by faint ambient light from outside. Rows of vehicles sat in numbered spaces, and somewhere an alarm was sounding, likely triggered automatically by the power failure. I pressed the key fob I'd found, and lights flashed on a sedan 3 spaces away. As I moved toward it, a door at the far end of the garage burst open. Flashlight beams cut through the dimness as security personnel entered, their voices echoing off concrete walls. All floors on lockdown. Missing subject from Prep Room 3, Caucasian. Female, approximately 30 years old. I ducked between vehicles, keeping low as I made my way to the sedan. The security team was moving systematically through the garage, checking between cars. When I reached the sedan, I eased the door open and slipped inside, praying the engine noise wouldn't immediately give me away. I started the car and switched on the headlights, temporarily blinding the nearest security guard who threw up his arm to shield his eyes. That moment of confusion was all I needed. I accelerated toward the exit ramp, ignoring shouts behind me. The parking gate was inoperable without power, its arm locked in the down position. I braced myself and crashed through it, metal and plastic splintering as the sedan burst onto the access road. Dawn had broken fully now, painting the eastern sky in pale orange. In daylight, I could finally see the full extent of the facility. A sprawling complex surrounded by manicured grounds and security fencing. The main gate ahead would surely be manned, even with the power failure. Instead of approaching it, I veered onto a service road that circled the perimeter. It led to a smaller gate used for deliveries, where a single guard stood outside a security booth, speaking urgently into a radio. I had seconds to make a decision. The guard had likely been alerted about my escape, but might not know what vehicle I was driving. I slowed as I approached, lowering the window and holding up the borrowed ID badge as if checking in for work. The guard stepped forward, squinting in the early morning light. I could see the moment recognition dawned in his eyes. Not of me specifically, but of the situation. His hand moved toward his weapon. I floored the accelerator, swerving around him and crashing through the service gate. The impact deployed the airbag, momentarily stunning me as the car careened onto the main road. Behind me, alarms began blaring across the complex. Through the rearview mirror, I saw security vehicles mobilizing in pursuit. They would be calling. Local police, setting up roadblocks, creating a perimeter. I had perhaps a 15-minute head start, and a stolen car that would be reported immediately. Not nearly enough to escape cleanly, but maybe enough to reach someone who could help. Detective Rivera. If I could get to him in Lakeside with what I knew about the renewal initiative, there might be a chance not just for my survival, but for justice. I accelerated north, the facility receding in my mirrors as the road stretched before me toward what I hoped was safety. Chapter 18. The Reckoning. The road to Lakeside wound through pine forests and small vacation communities along the lakeshore. Under different circumstances, the scenery might have been peaceful. Now, every curve concealed potential danger. Every passing vehicle a possible threat. I abandoned the stolen sedan after 30 minutes, parking it behind a seasonal restaurant closed for renovation. On foot, I crossed through backyards and wooded lots until I reached a small shopping center where early morning customers were already gathering at a coffee shop. Inside, I blended with the crowd of locals and summer tourists. Using cash from the lab coat's pocket, I purchased coffee and asked to use the shop's phone, claiming my cell had died. The barista pointed to an old landline near the restrooms. With shaking fingers, I dialed the number I'd memorized from Diane's files. Rivera. The voice that answered was gruff, cautious. "Detective Rivera? My name is—" I hesitated, suddenly unsure about using my real name on an open line. "I'm calling about Sarah Winters and the Renewal Initiative." A long pause followed. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to nearly a whisper. "Where are you calling from?" "Lakeside, the coffee shop on Harbor Street. Stay there, back corner table, don't leave." He hung up abruptly. I followed his instructions, choosing a table with a clear view of both the entrance and the back exit. The coffee grew cold as I watched customers come and go, flinching each time the door opened. After 20 minutes, a man entered wearing jeans and a faded flannel shirt. Not the police uniform I'd expected. He was in his 50s, with salt and pepper, hair and the weathered face of someone who spent considerable time outdoors. He ordered coffee, then scanned the room casually before approaching my table. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, loud enough for nearby customers to hear. I nodded, and he sat across from me, positioning himself to watch the door. "I'm not officially on duty," he said quietly. "Been suspended pending an internal investigation. Asking too many questions. About the wrong people." "Renewal," I said. He nodded slightly. "You mentioned Sarah Winters. How do you know her?" "I replaced her at Nexus Analytics, then nearly became the next donor at their clinic." His expression remained neutral, but his knuckles whitened around his coffee cup. "You've been inside the facility?" "Just escaped this morning. They were prepping me for harvesting." Rivera studied me for a long moment, then reached for his phone. "I need to make a call, but not here." We left separately, regrouping at his vehicle parked a block away, an old Jeep Cherokee with fishing gear visible in the back. As we drove, I provided a condensed version of everything that had happened. Mark's surveillance, Diane's warnings, the facility where donors were kept and harvested for wealthy clients. Rivera listened without interruption, navigating toward the outskirts of town. Eventually, he pulled into the driveway of a small cabin overlooking the lake. "My place," he explained. "Off the books. Department doesn't know about it." Inside, the cabin was sparsely furnished but clean. Maps and files covered one wall. His investigation board, similar to what Diane had assembled at the motel. "I've been tracking Renewal for 18 months, he said, pointing to the materials. "Started with Sarah Winters, but I've identified at least 24 missing persons connected to their operation, all with the same genetic marker, R157X, I said, remembering his notes. He nodded. "Rare protein configuration that makes tissue unusually compatible for transplant. Renewal has been identifying carriers and harvesting them for wealthy clients with compatible needs. Why hasn't anyone stopped them?" Rivera's laugh was bitter. "Money. Power. The clients are billionaires, political figures, people who can make investigations disappear. 3 different agencies have started looking into Renewal. All were shut down within weeks. So what do? We need irrefutable evidence and multiple sources coming forward simultaneously. Too big to bury." He gestured to his phone. "I have contacts at the FBI and 2 journalists I trust. But they need more than just our word. I can identify the facility, describe the surgical suites, the doctors. Everything I saw. Not enough. They'll claim you're delusional, that you attacked staff at a legitimate research facility." He hesitated. "What we really need is proof of the donors they're keeping." The implication was clear. We needed to go back. Before I could respond, headlights swept across the cabin windows. Rivera immediately killed the lights and moved to peer through the blinds. "Expecting someone?" I whispered. "No one knows about this place except my ex-wife." He reached for a shotgun mounted on the wall. "Back door. Go now." I hesitated. "I'm not leaving you to face them alone. This isn't a discussion. If they get both of us, the story dies. He pressed a flash drive into my hand. Everything I've gathered on renewal. Names, dates, connections. Get it to Alicia Mendez at the Tribune. The front door splintered inward before I could argue further. Rivera shoved me toward the kitchen as two figures in tactical gear entered, weapons raised. Detective Michael Rivera, one announced formally. You're wanted for questioning regarding interference in an ongoing federal investigation. Federal? Rivera's laugh was hollow. Which agency are you claiming to be from today? I slipped through the kitchen to the rear door as Rivera kept them talking. Outside, the night air was cool off the lake. I moved quickly along the shoreline, staying in shadows, the flash drive clutched tightly in my hand. Behind me, 3 shots echoed in rapid succession. Then silence. I froze, torn between continuing my escape and returning to help Rivera. Before I could decide, the rear door of the cabin burst open, light spilling onto the deck. I pressed myself against a tree, barely breathing as a figure emerged, scanning the darkness. It was Mark Holloway, his silhouette unmistakable against the light. In his hand was a pistol fitted with a suppressor, not the weapon of a corporate executive, but of someone accustomed to wet work. I know you're out there, he called, voice carrying across the quiet shoreline. This doesn't have to end badly for you. The procedure can be painless, dignified even, a purpose larger than yourself. I remained motionless as he descended the steps to the narrow beach, moving methodically in my direction. Think about what you're throwing away, he continued. Your genetic profile could save a man who's changing the world. Your sacrifice would mean something. He was close enough now that I could see his face in the moonlight, calm, reasonable, as if discussing a business proposal rather than my systematic dismemberment. Last chance, he said softly. Show yourself, or the next body we find in these woods won't be intact enough to harvest. I backed away silently, one step at a time, until I felt the dock beneath my feet. Mark continued his search along the tree, line moving away from me. The lake stretched behind me, dark and vast. Somewhere across those waters was another town, other people, a chance to deliver Rivera's evidence. I eased onto a small rowboat tied to the dock, untethering it as quietly as possible. As the current carried me away from shore, I heard Mark's frustrated shout, followed by the distinctive sound of his suppressed weapon firing into the darkness where I had been. I rowed through the night, guided only by distant lights on the far shore. The flash drive containing Rivera's investigation felt heavy in my pocket. Names of victims, details of the operation, evidence of what Renewal was doing. If I could reach Alicia Mendez, the story might still break. But even as I pulled the oars through black water, I knew the truth. Mark and his people would never stop hunting me. My genetic profile made me too valuable to their clients. Even if the story broke, their resources were vast enough to disappear and rebuild elsewhere. I was no longer just running for my life. I was running to ensure those they had already taken, Sarah Winters and countless others, would not be forgotten, that their stolen lives would have meaning through exposure of the truth. Dawn was breaking as I reached the opposite shore, exhausted but determined. In the early light, I could see the headline in my mind, Renewal Initiative Exposed. The harvesting of human beings. It would be my testimony against theirs, my word against their wealth and influence, my truth against their power. But for the first time since fleeing Nexus Analytics, I allowed myself to feel something close to hope, because now finally I wasn't running alone.